Clara Johnson wasn't the kind of woman who sought attention. At 72 years old, she had seen enough of life's ups and downs to know that appearances often held little meaning. But as she entered the grand lobby of the Liberty Tower Hotel in downtown Chicago, it felt as though every pair of eyes in the room was silently appraising her. Clara didn't mind. It was a feeling she had grown used to over the years. What bothered her, though, was the way people made assumptions about her, and how their assumptions would often shape their treatment of her. Clara was dressed simply, almost modestly. Her grey hair, neatly pinned back beneath a soft, dark blue scarf, was the only thing about her that might have suggested anything beyond the ordinary. Her coat, a woolen trench that had clearly seen better days, was practical rather than stylish. It had a few frayed edges, the fabric slightly faded from years of faithful service. The handbag she carried was a classic leather piece, well worn but polished, its once bright color softened to a deep brown that reflected the many stories it had held over the years. At first glance, she didn't look like someone who belonged in this opulent space. As Clara made her way into the heart of the lobby, the high ceilings of the hotel loomed above her, their intricate carvings and gold detailing a testament to the grandeur that had become synonymous with the Liberty Tower Hotel. The floors were a smooth marble, reflecting the gleam of the large crystal chandelier overhead, and the atmosphere was filled with the gentle hum of conversation and the clink of glasses. Guests dressed in tailored suits and evening gowns lounged in plush velvet chairs, sipping cocktails, while staff in crisp uniforms glided across the room with professional precision. But Clara wasn't here as a guest. She was here on a mission. For all the years she had spent building the Liberty Tower Hotel, the work that had started as a dream, the idea that had seemed impossible to anyone else, Clara had poured her heart and soul into it. She had worked tirelessly, overcoming barriers that were put in front of her because of her race and gender. The hotel was her pride, a manifestation of her struggle and her success. And yet, despite all that she had accomplished, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that some of her staff still didn't fully understand the core values that the hotel represented. The Liberty Tower Hotel wasn't just any hotel, it was the culmination of Clara's vision. An empire that stood as a beacon for inclusivity and respect in the hospitality industry. It catered to the powerful, the wealthy, and the influential, yes, but it also welcomed people from all walks of life. That was the essence of Clara's business philosophy. From the very beginning, she had made it clear to those she hired that their job was not just to serve the rich and famous, but to create an environment that felt welcoming and equal for everyone who walked through the doors. But lately, Clara had begun to notice small changes in the hotel's atmosphere. Complaints from guests had started to trickle in. Complaints that sounded eerily familiar to the kinds of experiences she herself had suffered when she first began her career. There were murmurs of discrimination, of subtle, unspoken biases that made people feel unwelcome. A few customers had even said that they felt out of place in the hotel. Their complaints often disregarded. Clara couldn't ignore it. The signs were there, and they needed to be addressed. That's why Clara had decided to visit the Liberty Tower Hotel today, not as the CEO, not as the founder, but as an ordinary guest. She wanted to see the hotel through the eyes of someone who wasn't in charge. To experience the service as a customer would. She knew that real leadership meant understanding the truth from the ground up, not just from the polished reports and reviews that came in from the top. And so, she had chosen this day to slip in unnoticed, to see how her hotel was truly being run when she wasn't around. As Clara walked through the lobby, the soft click of her low heels echoed in the vast space. She was careful not to make a scene. to blend in as best she could. She didn't want to draw attention to herself, but she could already feel the eyes of the staff on her. There was a certain look of dismissal, a certain condescension in their eyes as they glanced at her. They couldn't know who she was. Of course. Why would they? To them, she was just another elderly woman, someone who probably didn't belong in a place like this. One young man at the concierge desk, a tall, impeccably dressed employee with a name tag that read, Andrew, barely glanced up as she approached. He had a polite, practiced smile on his face, but Clara could tell it didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile that said, "I'm just doing my job." There was a certain arrogance about it, though, like he was used to dealing with only the most important guests. When she reached the desk, Andrew gave her a once-over, his gaze flicking up and down her modest attire before he spoke. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How can I assist you today?" he asked, his voice smooth but with a hint of condescension. Clara smiled calmly, even though she could almost hear his unspoken thoughts. "She doesn't belong here. I'd like to book a room," she said, her voice steady and firm. Andrew's smile widened, though Clara could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze still lingering on her shoes and coat, and said in a tone that bordered on mocking, "This is a luxury hotel. Ma'am, rooms here start at $7 a night. Are you sure you're looking for something in our price range?" Clara's lips tightened into a thin line, but she refused to let his words rattle her. She had faced far worse in her lifetime. Clara had always known how to handle people who underestimated her. Silence was her weapon, restraint was her strength. "I'm aware of the prices," Clara replied, her voice calm. "Please check for availability." Andrew hesitated for a moment, no doubt debating whether it was even worth his time to deal with someone who didn't appear to fit the profile of a typical guest. But after a brief pause, he sighed and turned to his computer, his fingers slowly tapping on the keyboard as he pretended to check availability. Behind him, Clara could hear the faint whisper of laughter. Two staff members were speaking to each other, their words barely audible but clear enough for Clara to catch. "She's in the wrong place. She'll never be able to afford it." The sting of their judgment hit Clara, but she remained composed. She wasn't there to be treated like royalty. She was there to understand what was really happening in her hotel. After what felt like an eternity, Andrew finally looked up and, with a sigh, said, "We do have a room available. It's an entry-level suite. Nothing fancy, but it's all we have." "That will do," Clara replied, pulling out a sleek black American Express Centurion card, the kind that had only the most exclusive status. As she handed the card over, Andrew's eyes widened for just a split second. Clara noticed the brief hesitation, the realization that perhaps this woman wasn't exactly who he thought she was. But he quickly masked it, processing the payment without any further acknowledgement. "Enjoy your stay, ma'am," he said, handing her the key card with another polite smile that now seemed a little less certain. Clara walked away, her heart heavy but her resolve firm. She had seen what she needed to see. The hotel was not quite as welcoming as it should have been. And for that, there would be consequences. Clara had always believed in the power of observation. As the founder and CEO of Liberty Tower Hotel, she knew better than anyone the importance of understanding the finer details, the subtle things that most people overlooked. The little things, the gestures, the quiet attitudes, the undertones of how people treated each other, these were often more telling than anything else. Today, as she sat quietly in her suite, her thoughts raced, and a deep unease began to settle in her chest. She had walked into her hotel with the same unassuming composure she had always tried to maintain. But now, it was clear that there was more beneath the surface than just a few moments of condescension from staff members. The suite Clara had been assigned was lovely, certainly not lacking in luxury. The view of the city was breathtaking, stretching across the skyline, with the golden hue of the evening sun casting long shadows over the streets below. It was everything a guest could ask for: a king-sized bed draped in the finest linens, plush towels in the marble bathroom, and a tray of exquisite chocolates on the coffee table. Yet, Clara barely took notice of any of it. She had always known that luxury was more than just opulence. It was about feeling welcomed, respected, and valued. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Clara allowed herself a moment to breathe. The weight of the situation began to sink in. She had heard stories from friends, from loyal guests, about the increasing discontentment with the service at the Liberty Tower Hotel. But hearing it was one thing, experiencing it herself was something entirely different. She had been met with the same coldness and subtle prejudice that she had spent a lifetime fighting against. And the most painful part, it was happening in her own establishment. Clara couldn't afford to let this go unnoticed. As a leader, it was her responsibility to address these issues head-on, to ensure that the culture of her hotel reflected the values she had always championed, values of inclusion, of fairness, and of respect for all people, regardless of their race, gender, or background. She reached for her laptop, which was sitting on the desk across the room. It was time to get to work. Clara knew she had the power to change things. But that didn't mean it would be easy. There was a certain discomfort in confronting the truth. But she had learned long ago that the truth was the only thing that could set her free, no matter how painful it might be. Logging into the hotel's internal systems, Clara had access to everything: guest reviews, employee records, financial statements, and, most importantly, the comments and feedback that had been left by past guests. As her fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard, Clara's heart sank when she saw the patterns emerging. There was a clear divide between how certain guests were treated based on their appearance or status. More troubling still were the consistent complaints from minority guests who had felt dismissed, uncomfortable, and even ignored by the hotel staff. One review in particular caught her eye. It was a simple comment left by a guest named Mrs. Thompson, who had described an experience that Clara recognized all too well. "Beautiful hotel, but the staff made me feel like I didn't belong. I won't be returning." Clara's jaw tightened as she read the rest of the review. The tone of Mrs. Thompson's words mirrored the exact treatment Clara herself had endured earlier in the day. She couldn't ignore it any longer. This wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a symptom of a larger problem. One that had been festering within the hotel's culture for some time. And now, it was her responsibility to fix it. Clara leaned back in the chair, her mind racing. She had worked too hard to build this empire, too long to allow it to be tainted by the same biases and prejudices that had plagued her throughout her career. She had created Liberty Tower Hotel to be a place of refuge, a sanctuary where everyone, no matter their background, could feel welcome and respected. The very thought that her employees were betraying those values made her blood boil. Her phone buzzed beside her, interrupting her thoughts. It was Marcus, her trusted assistant. He had been with her for years, and she knew she could count on him when things got tough. "Ms. Johnson, do you need anything?" Marcus's voice crackled through the phone. Clara's eyes narrowed as she glanced at the glowing screen. She didn't need to sugarcoat things any longer. The time for action had come. "Yes, Marcus," she said, her voice steady but resolute. "I need you to prepare the board for an emergency meeting. I want to address some issues with the hotel's operations. And I'll need the personnel files for the front desk and restaurant staff as soon as possible. It's time to make some changes." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. And Clara could almost hear the wheels turning in Marcus's mind. He knew that when she called for a meeting like this, it wasn't a simple matter. It was serious. "Understood," Marcus replied. "I'll get everything ready for you. Is there anything else you need?" "No," Clara said, her voice firm. "Just get the files. I'll handle the rest." As she ended the call, Clara's gaze drifted back to the computer screen. The staff members' files were already starting to come through. She scanned them quickly, looking for any red flags that might explain the dismissive behavior she had encountered. Andrew, the young concierge who had been so condescending, had only recently joined the hotel, but his previous employers had glowing reviews of him. Clara was surprised, but she knew there was more to it than just one bad experience. Andrew's file was missing one crucial element. He had never undergone any diversity or sensitivity training. It was a glaring oversight, and one that needed to be rectified immediately. Then there was Scott, the maitre d' at the hotel's upscale restaurant. He had been with Liberty Tower for several years, and while he had been praised for his efficiency, Clara couldn't ignore the numerous complaints filed against him. The reviews suggested that he often treated guests based on his own perceptions of class and status, favoring those who fit his idea of what a worthy guest should look like. Clara sighed, her disappointment deepening. These weren't just isolated incidents. This was a culture problem, one that had permeated the hotel's staff. But Clara wasn't about to let this slide. She had built this hotel, and she would rebuild the culture within it if necessary. It was time to take swift action. The next morning, Clara awoke before dawn. Her mind was racing, but the serenity of the early morning hours provided the perfect space for her to focus. She had a plan now. The quiet had given way to resolve. She would confront the staff head-on. But not with rage or accusations. No, Clara was too calculating for that. She would work quietly, methodically, and when the time was right, she would unveil the truth to those who thought they could hide it. After a quick breakfast, Clara reviewed the files Marcus had sent her overnight. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. She had already decided that the morning meeting would be a turning point. It would be her opportunity to address the deeper issues at play, issues of bias, negligence, and a lack of respect for the values she had built the hotel on. Clara dressed in a sharp navy suit, her hair neatly styled, and her demeanor as professional as ever. She looked every bit the CEO she was. Though today, that was not the role she would be playing. She was going to expose the cracks that had begun to form in her empire and take back control. As Clara made her way to the hotel's grand ballroom for the meeting, she could feel the atmosphere shifting. The staff members, housekeepers, bellhops, waitstaff, and front desk clerks were already gathering, their faces anxious and uncertain. Word had spread that something big was about to happen. A few exchanged worried glances, but no one knew exactly what was coming. Clara wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. She entered the ballroom, her heels clicking against the marble floor with a sharp precision that commanded attention. The room grew still as all eyes turned toward her. There were whispers among the employees, murmurs of confusion, curiosity, and fear. Clara walked to the front of the room and stood behind the podium, her gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. Some were familiar, others less so, but one thing was clear. Every single one of them had a role in the hotel's current atmosphere. And it was time for them to understand that. She didn't speak immediately. Clara let the silence hang in the air. The tension palpable. The employees shifted uncomfortably, awaiting the moment when she would break the quiet. Finally, Clara's voice cut through the stillness. Low and controlled. "Good morning," she began, her tone calm but firm. "For those of you who don't know me, I am Clara Johnson, founder and CEO of Liberty Tower Hotel." The room fell silent. "I walked through this hotel yesterday. As a guest," Clara continued, her gaze unwavering, unannounced. "I wanted to see firsthand how our staff treats the people who walk through these doors. I wanted to understand if the values I've built this hotel on are being upheld in every corner of this place. And what I encountered," she paused, letting the weight of her words sink in, "was deeply troubling." Clara's eyes locked with Andrew's across the room. His face, once confident and aloof, had turned pale as realization dawned on him. Clara could see him shift uncomfortably, his body stiffening. "I don't believe in being soft with this kind of thing," Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. "Disrespect, discrimination, and bias have no place in my hotel. And I have seen all three. Not just with me, but with guests who have felt unwelcome, invisible, and dismissed." A murmur rippled through the room as some employees shifted uncomfortably, others exchanging uneasy glances. Clara allowed the tension to build, watching as the employees absorbed the weight of her words. "I'll be blunt," she said, her eyes now sweeping across the room. "This is not just a failure in customer service. It is a failure in the core values that Liberty Tower Hotel was founded on. Inclusivity, respect, professionalism." She looked again at Andrew, who shifted his gaze, avoiding her eyes. Behind him, Scott, the maitre d', stood with his arms crossed, his face a mask of indifference. Clara had already seen the way he had treated her in the restaurant the night before. The dismissiveness, the coldness, it was as clear as day. Clara's voice grew colder. "Andrew, Scott," she said, her tone sharpening, "I watched both of you yesterday. And I saw exactly how you treated me. Not as a guest, just as a person who didn't fit your definition of what belongs here." Andrew flinched, and Clara could almost see the realization of what he had done creeping over him. He had underestimated her, he had made a judgment based on her appearance. And now he would have to face the consequences. Clara took a step forward, her presence commanding the attention of every person in the room. "The truth is, some of you have failed me. You failed the very people who walk through these doors expecting to be treated with dignity and respect. And I will not tolerate it." The room was dead silent now, and Clara felt the eyes of the staff on her, all of them realizing the gravity of the situation. No one spoke, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "I have reviewed your personnel files," Clara continued. "I've read the complaints, I've seen the patterns, and I'm not blind to the fact that there are some among you who have contributed to a culture of favoritism and bias." Her eyes locked with Scott now. "You, Scott, have been here long enough to know better. Yet, your treatment of guests has been unacceptable. Your behavior last night was proof enough of that." Scott's face flushed, and he looked like he might say something. But Clara raised her hand, silencing him. "Today," she said, "we are going to make things right. Effective immediately. There will be mandatory diversity and sensitivity training for every single one of you. We will also implement an anonymous reporting system, so our guests and employees can voice their concerns without fear of retaliation." There was a collective shift in the room as the employees began to process her words. Some of them looked relieved. This was a change they had been hoping for, perhaps even expecting. But others, Those who had been complicit in the biases Clara had witnessed were visibly nervous. Clara stepped back from the podium. "I will also be taking further action," she said, her voice now steady but firm. "Those who fail to uphold these standards will be held accountable. And that includes you, Andrew and Scott. I'm afraid your time here is over." There was a shocked silence before the whispers began. Andrew's face drained of color, and Clara could hear him muttering to himself, trying to comprehend what was happening. Scott, on the other hand, remained rigid, his face pale but unwilling to show weakness. Clara turned to Marcus, who had stepped up beside her, and he handed her a clipboard with a list of names. She looked down at it for a moment before reading aloud, her voice unwavering, effective immediately. "Andrew and Scott are no longer employed at Liberty Tower Hotel. I want everyone here to understand this. There is zero tolerance for discrimination, no matter who you are or who you think you are." The murmurs grew louder, and Clara could see the fear in the eyes of those who hadn't yet realized how serious she was. The room was full of uneasy energy, but Clara was resolute. This was her hotel, her legacy, and she would protect it. Clara turned to the rest of the staff. "I hope you understand why I've made these decisions. This is not about punishment. This is about creating an environment where everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background, is treated equally. From today on, this hotel will be a place where inclusivity isn't just a policy, it's a way of life." As Clara left the ballroom, she could feel the weight of her decision, but it was a weight she carried proudly. She had done what was necessary, and the future of Liberty Tower Hotel would be stronger for it. The aftermath of the meeting lingered in Clara's mind as she walked through the grand halls of Liberty Tower Hotel. She had expected some level of resistance, but what surprised her the most was how quickly the atmosphere had shifted after the staff meeting. It was as if an invisible weight had been lifted from the hotel. The once persistent tension that Clara had felt throughout her visit now felt like something that could be restructured and repaired. As Clara made her way to the hotel's private office suite, she reflected on her actions. The confrontation had been necessary, but she couldn't afford to be complacent. The changes had been set in motion, but they needed to be reinforced with further actions. Today wasn't the end of the process, it was just the beginning. She walked into her office, her footsteps confident and purposeful. The sleek glass walls gave her a panoramic view of the hotel's courtyard, where guests lounged by the water fountains and chatted over afternoon tea. The view, though spectacular, was the least of Clara's thoughts now. She wasn't here for the view, she was here to make sure her hotel could heal and grow from within. Marcus was already there, standing by the desk, his eyes filled with both concern and admiration. Clara could tell that the urgency of the morning had left him with lingering questions, but he knew her well enough to wait for her to speak. "Marcus," Clara said, settling into her chair with a deep breath. "What's the status on the diversity training program? I want it rolled out by the end of the week." Marcus nodded, his fingers quickly tapping on the tablet in front of him. "We've got a contractor lined up. They specialize in corporate diversity and inclusion. They've agreed to start immediately and will tailor the program for us. We're looking at a 3-day intensive workshop for all employees, but we'll need to arrange for the schedules. Some staff will have to work during their shifts, so it'll take a little time to coordinate." Clara nodded, her fingers tapping the edge of the desk thoughtfully. "Good. But I need to make sure it's more than just a seminar. I need it to be practical. Real-world situations. Real examples. We can't just go through the motions. I want our staff to understand not only what's unacceptable but why it's unacceptable." And I want this culture change to stick long after the training ends. Marcus's eyes met hers. Understood, Clara. I'll make sure it's comprehensive and ongoing. We'll also need to set up the anonymous reporting system you mentioned. That'll need to be up and running within the next couple of days. Clara smiled slightly, appreciating Marcus's quick understanding. You're on top of it. But there's more to do. Clara stood up from her desk and walked to the large window that overlooked the city. The view of downtown Chicago, with its towering skyscrapers and the faint hum of busy streets below, gave her a sense of power, something she had earned, something she had fought for. But she also knew that power, without responsibility, would eventually break her empire. She turned back to Marcus, her voice firm. It's not just about making changes to policies. It's about how we embody those policies every day. It's about leading by example. We need a shift in how we're perceived not only by our guests but by ourselves. I'm going to need your help in restructuring the leadership team. We need people who believe in the values we're setting, not just employees who are good at their jobs. Marcus gave a small nod, clearly intrigued by what Clara was suggesting. You want to shake up the leadership team? Yes, Clara replied. We need people who understand that leadership isn't just about managing operations, it's about managing culture. We need people who know how to inspire, who believe in the power of inclusivity, and who can bring that belief into their work every day. I'm not interested in having managers who simply take orders. I need leaders who can make decisions with the well-being of every guest and every employee in mind. There was a brief silence. And then Marcus spoke. We've been lucky so far, Clara. The leadership team has done well in running the day-to-day operations. But I see what you mean. The culture has been neglected. And it's time for a shift. Clara met his gaze, her voice resolute. I've been lucky to have people like you by my side, Marcus. But I won't rest until I know this hotel stands for what I've always wanted it to stand for: respect for all. No exceptions. Not for the rich, not for the famous, not for anyone. Marcus was quiet for a moment, clearly reflecting on her words. Finally, he spoke again, this time with a hint of excitement. I'll start reaching out to candidates for the leadership roles. We'll get this in motion quickly. Clara smiled. Good, I'm counting on you. But there's one more thing I need to address: public perception. Marcus tilted his head slightly. What do you mean? Clara turned back to the window, looking out at the city once more. We've made a statement internally. But now we need to take that message to the public. People need to see that we're changing, that we are committed to building a better, more inclusive environment here at Liberty Tower Hotel. I want to personally address the media. We'll issue a statement, and I want to be transparent about what's happening and why. I won't let this hotel be remembered for what went wrong. I want it to be known for the way we fixed it. Marcus smiled with admiration. Clara, you're not just changing a hotel. You're changing the entire industry. Clara looked at him, her expression steady. That's the plan. Clara stood on the stage of a local press conference, ready to speak to the media about the changes taking place at Liberty Tower Hotel. She had made it clear to the reporters that this wasn't just a corporate initiative, this was personal. As a woman of color who had faced countless challenges in her life, Clara had always understood the importance of creating spaces where people felt seen and heard. And now, it was time for the world to know that the Liberty Tower Hotel would be a shining example of how things could, and should, be done differently. The lights from the cameras flashed as reporters eagerly waited for her to speak. Clara adjusted the microphone in front of her and took a deep breath. This was her moment to make a statement, one that would echo far beyond the walls of the hotel. I stand before you today, she began, not just as the CEO of Liberty Tower Hotel, but as someone who believes that true success isn't measured by the size of your empire, but by the inclusivity and respect that empire represents. The reporters leaned forward, captivated. Clara's voice was calm, yet powerful, her words carrying weight as she continued. We have recognized that certain behaviors have not lived up to the standards that I have set for this hotel. But we are taking responsibility. We are implementing new policies, training, and systems to ensure that Liberty Tower Hotel is a place where every guest and every employee feels welcome, valued, and respected. This is just the beginning of the change. And I am committed to ensuring that this hotel becomes a place where all are equal. The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Clara knew she had made an impact. This was her statement, not just to the media, but to the world. Liberty Tower Hotel was going to be better, no matter the cost. The days following Clara's public statement were filled with intense planning and rapid changes. The pressure was mounting, but Clara had never shied away from a challenge. As she sat in her office, the soft hum of activity from the hotel outside her door, she felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. There was a great deal of work to do, and she wasn't about to let it slip through her fingers. Clara had seen the media coverage, the press had latched onto her words and spread them like wildfire. Headlines lauded her commitment to creating a more inclusive environment. But Clara knew that the real work had just begun. The attention was flattering, but it wasn't what motivated her. What mattered now was the execution of her vision. She had promised change, and she would deliver it. The first major task was the restructuring of the hotel's leadership team. The hiring process for new leaders had already begun. Clara wasn't looking for managers who could simply maintain operations. She needed individuals who could inspire change, who believed in the values she had fought so hard to uphold. These new leaders would be the cornerstone of the hotel's transformation, and Clara was determined to get it right. Marcus had been hard at work, reaching out to potential candidates who were aligned with the hotel's new direction. Clara had made it clear to him that the leadership team had to be diverse. Not just in background, but in perspective. She wanted people who would lead with empathy, who understood the significance of inclusivity, and who could drive the hotel's new mission forward. I've narrowed it down to a few strong candidates, Marcus said one afternoon as Clara looked over the short list. I've interviewed several senior managers from other hotels, as well as some consultants who specialize in cultural transformation. They all seem eager to take on the challenge. Clara nodded as she scanned the profiles. These are good candidates, but I want to meet them in person. I want to see how they react when we ask tough questions. This isn't just about experience. It's about vision, heart, and commitment. As Clara prepared for her meetings with the candidates, she couldn't help but think back to the moment when she had taken control of the situation. It had been the right decision, but it wasn't easy. Letting go of trusted employees like Andrew and Scott had been a necessary step, but it had left Clara with a sense of both pride and sadness. She understood that change could be painful, but it was the only way forward. The hotel's staff was still adjusting to the new environment. Some had embraced the shift, eager to be a part of the solution, but others were skeptical, unsure of how the changes would affect their positions. Clara had expected resistance, but she knew that with time, the culture would shift. She just had to be patient and consistent. Later that week, Clara attended her first leadership meeting with the new team she had appointed. The room was filled with energy, and the faces around the table were a mix of excitement and nervousness. Clara could sense the uncertainty in the air, But she also saw the potential for growth. These leaders were ready for change, they just needed the right guidance. Thank you all for joining me today. Clara began, standing at the head of the table. I know this is a big transition, and I appreciate your willingness to be a part of this journey. The changes we are making at Liberty Tower Hotel are not just about implementing new policies. This is about creating a culture that reflects the values we all share: respect, inclusivity, and fairness. She paused, allowing her words to settle in. I've made it clear that this hotel is going to be different. The culture we've had in the past doesn't align with what we're trying to build here. We're going to raise the bar, not just in how we treat our guests, but in how we treat each other as colleagues. That starts with all of you. Clara looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each leader. She could see the determination in their faces. They were ready to lead, ready to bring the change she envisioned. But she knew that change wouldn't happen overnight. It would take time, patience, and consistent effort. I want to be transparent with all of you. Clara continued. We're going to face challenges along the way. There will be pushback from some of the staff, especially those who have been resistant to change. But we can't afford to back down. If we want Liberty Tower Hotel to be a true reflection of the values we stand for, we need to hold ourselves, and everyone around us, accountable. The room was quiet for a moment as Clara's words sunk in. Finally, one of the new leaders, Carla, who had been promoted to general manager, spoke up. I completely agree, Carla said, her voice steady. I've been with the hotel for over 10 years, and I've seen firsthand how difficult it can be to change a culture. But I've also seen how much potential we have here. With the right leadership, we can create an environment where everyone feels respected and valued. Clara smiled, grateful for Carla's support. Exactly. And that's why we're here today. I'm counting on all of you to set the tone for the rest of the team. You are the ones who will lead by example. If we can create an environment where our employees feel heard and supported, the rest will follow. Our guests will feel that shift, too. The meeting continued with a discussion on how to implement the new training programs, improve internal communication, and establish a clearer path for addressing issues of bias and discrimination. It was a lot of work, but Clara felt more confident than ever that the right people were in place to get the job done. As Clara stood outside the doors of Liberty Tower Hotel later that month, she felt a surge of pride. The grand reopening event was a chance for the public to see the changes she had been working so hard to implement. It wasn't just a marketing campaign, it was an opportunity to showcase the new era of the hotel. One built on the principles of respect and inclusivity. The hotel's front entrance was adorned with elegant banners that read, "Welcome to Liberty Tower Hotel, where everyone belongs." The air was crisp, and the streets of Chicago were alive with the usual hustle and bustle. But Clara knew that today was different. Today, she was revealing the new face of Liberty Tower Hotel, not just in terms of its renovations, but in terms of its soul. As the guests began to arrive, Clara greeted them with a warm smile. The employees, newly trained and invigorated by the changes, greeted the guests with genuine enthusiasm. The energy in the air was palpable. Clara could see it in the way the staff interacted with guests, the way they made sure everyone felt included, valued, and respected. This was the hotel she had always dreamed of, an inclusive, welcoming space for everyone. Clara took a moment to look around, watching as the event unfolded. The transformation wasn't just in the physical space, it was in the people. Liberty Tower Hotel had truly become a place where everyone could feel at home.